Hi, and welcome back to the Choose to Be Happy podcast. Today we have a very special guest. Rabbi David Wolpe is here. He was named the most influential rabbi in America by Newsweek and is one of the 50 most influential Jews in the world by the Jerusalem Post. He was twice named one of the 500 most influential people in Los Angeles by the LA Business Journal. Rabbi Wolpe has been published and profiled in the New York Times, Washington Post, and many more. He's been featured on various news segments and television series on PBS, the History Channel, and many more. He's spoken in scholarly forums worldwide. I am so honored to have him here. He's published books, and I've been listening to his sermons for years for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and thank you so much for being
It's a
here.
great pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank
You
you.
know, I have to admit, I'm like more nervous about this interview than I've done 100 of these.
Don't be nervous.
I've
It's
been
just a
watching.
conversation.
Thank you so much. I've been tuning in to like every high holiday and many Shabbat services. I've been watching you from our home like throughout the pandemic, and it's very nice to like interact. So thank
Thank
you.
you. Sure.
So I would love to ask you this because I I'd love to know like what advice could you give to anybody who wants to be happier?
Well, it's a broad question, and a lot of it, of course, depends on your circumstances. But I would say one of the principal sabotagers of happiness is projection, that we look into the future.
Mm.
And people who aren't happy generally look into the future and assume that it's going to be bad in some way. In other words, they're drawn to the bad things of the future, and and it also robs you of the present,
Yeah.
which is a real problem, because if some, I mean, that's one part, is if something wonderful is happening now, but you think about when it's going to end. I'm enjoying this person's company, but they're going to leave. Or I'm having a great vacation, but I know I have to go back to work. It makes it impossible for you to enjoy what you have now. The second piece of this is this um, negative bias that we have, such that I've said many times, people have come to my office, I don't know how many times, and said, why me?
Mm.
And it always means, why me? Why did I get cancer? Why me? Why did my relative die? Why me? Something like that. But they almost never come and say, why me? I grew up in the richest country in the world and my parents love me. Why me?
Right.
Because we assume our blessings and then we get upset at our problems. But our blessings are at least as big, and in our cases, almost always bigger than our problems. So there is a negative bias in both directions, both present and future, and it really steals a lot of happiness.
Yes. It's so true. And, just even pushing ourselves to think about what we're grateful for and to see the good and to recognize it and acknowledge it. You're right. Like we don't do it
Right.
enough.
I'll give you a good way to think about it that I heard years ago about a professor who stands in front of his class, and he has a big whiteboard and he puts a black dot in the middle and he says, what do you see? And they all say, I see a black dot. And he goes, no, you don't. You see a big whiteboard with a single black dot. He said, but that's the way a lot of us live our lives. That is, everything's going fine, but my arm hurts. So
Right.
all I think about is that my arm hurts. The fact that everything else is good, I don't think about. And we can, as you said, we can be trained out of that. But it's worth first just noticing how many things are going well and how many things are good in your life.
It's so true. I feel like it's so common. Like I'll run into people at the market or at drop off when I'm dropping off my kids at school in the morning and you say, "Hey, how's everything going?" And I feel like the first thing people want to talk about is the one thing that's bad.
Right.
It's like,
True.
what is
Well,
that?
also, there is, by the way, this bias, I just want to say, and it's worth noticing, this bias is not only true for individuals, it's also true for the way we see the world, because there is a huge, like, data is generally positive, but we don't see data, we see anecdotes. So if
Yeah.
I say to you, 800 million Chinese have been lifted out of poverty in the last 30 years, 300 million Indians have been lifted out of poverty in the last 30 years. World hunger has been cut more than 50%. But what you will hear people saying is everything is terrible. The world is worse than it's ever been. It's more divided than it's ever been. It's
Right.
not true. It's just not true, except that what we see is a steady diet of negative news. And the fact that you know, man ate normal meal and was happy today is never going to make the news, but
Right.
man got poisoned by a bad berry will be in every newspaper. And
Yes.
so we have this tendency to only see the bad.
It's so true. I mean, I know for myself, like I tend to become very anxious if I hear a lot of bad news. And especially over the last couple of years, like just turning on the TV to any channel, all you hear is like all the bad, you know, and
Right.
it's even on a good day, you'll hear about the
Yes.
kidnappings and the car crashes and like all the horrible stuff.
Right.
And I just got to the point where I was like, I'm not going to turn on the TV. Like I can't turn on the news because it's just too upsetting, you know?
And it also, it's very bad for our kids
Yeah,
to learn to see the world that way because most of our kids, are now, and they've lived through a really difficult time after
right.
all. I mean, it's not to the pandemic was, it wasn't as unique as we think if you look back in history, but in most of our lifetimes, I certainly have never seen a time like this. And so there are things to be concerned about. But even there, we didn't go hungry. We,
Yeah,
I mean, in our world, the things that in ancient or medieval times would have seemed unimaginable were sort of everyday. People delivered stuff to our door, or um, and we have roofs over our heads, and we have a lot of blessings, including the blessings of modern medicine.
and we had the blessing of time to be with the people that we
Right
love. You know, it's
now,
like,
yes, I don't want to minimize,
right,
but close to 1 million people died from
right.
COVID. Most of them were very elderly, but a good number of them weren't. And it was a terrible time in a lot of ways. So I don't want people to think I'm saying everything was great. It
Right.
obviously wasn't. But our tendency is very heavily weighted in the negative direction. And there were a lot of blessings that came out of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I noticed like I feel like I don't know if a lot of other people do this too, but I feel like when I'm going around people who I know are unhappy, and I happen to know a lot of people who tend to be less happy than the norm, I feel weird telling them about anything good going on because I
Mm-hmm.
feel like it's
Yeah.
almost like boasting, or I don't want to make them feel jealous, or I don't want to make them wish or feel like, so how what would you advise somebody like that? Because I notice when I spend time with certain people, I tend to say more negative things. Like it's like, oh, I feel
Right.
like to have a conversation with certain people, I feel like I need to share with them
I
all the bad things in my
It's
life.
it's easier in some ways. It's easier for a rabbi than it is for a friend. But I
Yeah.
can always say to people, "Tell me something good that's happening in your life."
Mm,
You know, and 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 when you sort of start to move people in that direction, then it can sometimes pick up steam
yes.
because I'm not saying the bad things aren't real. I'm
Right.
just asking you to tell me something good so that I'll know that part of your life too. And then they can say, "Oh, my kid did this," or "I succeeded in that," or "Well, actually, now that you mention it." But I think sometimes we need a nudge in that direction,
Yes.
and we can say, in fact, I hear the really hard things. Something really nice happened to me. I wonder if anything like that is happening in your life.
Yeah.
Or how are your kids doing in school? Because usually they're not going to say, "Oh, they're terrible, just terrible."
Right.
Um, but yeah, it is certainly true that I don't know why we're designed this way, but it is more fun to share bad news than great. It's just more fun. And I mean, it's just true. We have to admit it. It is more fun. And I don't know why. It's more fun to say something salacious or gossipy than it is to say, "Oh, by the way, I ran into so and so and he's just fine." I mean,
Yeah, right.
it doesn't give you, it's not as exciting. Um, but there's a cost. There's a
Yeah.
cost.
I mean, that's what sells on the news. Like nobody wants to turn on and see something that's, somebody had breakfast and
Yeah, there
then they
are
went to
good
work.
news channels, but and you can and the news is a really good example because often at the end they'll have like a 2 minute feel good story, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like all the good things in a world that has innumerable good things, all of them are compressed into that last 2 minutes. That there's a boy in London who's giving out toys to people on the street, and I
Yeah.
mean, It's nice. It's not, it isn't nice, but there is so much good that is being done in the world every single day that it's astonishing that we don't hear more about it.
Yep. I'm taking a Musar class right now,
Mhm.
and we're working on anger. And it's an interesting subject because I feel like, that's something that I need to work on. Like, especially like the other day, I was making a phone call to this company. I've been waiting for a package and it's lost in the mail. And it's been like weeks of phone calls and aggravation. And I feel like as much as I try to like not get angry, like I get so frustrated sometimes
Yeah.
and it steals my joy, it like, because then I feel guilty because I was now
Right.
not very kind to the person on the other end of the line. But it's interesting because, you know, what I'm trying to do, and I don't know if you have better advice or if you have any advice for like when we get frustrated or when things are going bad, is like I'm trying to think about the things I'm grateful for in relation to that thing that's aggravating me. So
So I think anger is obviously a big anger is the hardest emotion to get right
yeah.
because there is an appropriate anger, but it's so hard to stay within those bounds. Um, and here, like the old advice is still really valuable, as in take a few seconds before you send that angry email or tweet or
Yes.
whatever. The longer you take in between, Emerson, the American philosopher, has this great phrase. He says, "My moods don't believe each other."
Mm.
It's like when you're angry, you can't imagine not being angry, and
Right.
when you're not angry, you can't imagine that you said that when you were angry.
Yeah.
And 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 moods change. So if you can build in when you're on the phone, it's hard, but if you can build in some time between your reaction internally and your reaction in the world, it's incredibly helpful and will save you endless heartache. And it's
Hmm.
really hard to do because you feel such righteous satisfaction
Yeah.
in your angry response. But it's almost always a mistake. And you won't be able to judge whether it's a mistake until later.
Right.
So you have to have enough trust in your own process to wait, because you can still say it's not going to lose its effectiveness if it's really good. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, sometimes thinking of what you're grateful for, but sometimes just taking the time to know, though, as the rabbis say, anger is like a boiling pot,
Yeah.
which means it spills over in things that you don't mean it to spill over onto, like other people in your life.
Yeah. And then there's another thing too, which is, when we say the thing that we didn't mean to say, whether it was like to our kids or to the person that you don't even see their face on the phone, or,
Yeah,
the person you honk inappropriately
yeah,
because you're
yeah,
aggravated on the street,
right.
it's like, then there's the whole concept of forgiveness. And it's like, it's
Yeah.
hard to forgive yourself. And I feel like that also kind of will steal your joy.
It's a great point, and it's true. Um, we have to, again, you have to get it right. Like, you can't be too self-forgiving. You
Right.
can't say, "Oh, well, I did it, so it was okay." But on the other hand, um, if it's not constructive to continually be upset with yourself, you
Hmm.
have to be able to let things go. You really do. And one of the ways you can let things go is by allowing yourself the luxury of being imperfect. You
Mm.
know, it's people have sometimes very unrealistic um, expectations of themselves, and it makes you defensive and upset and angry. And one of the reasons why I, like, even psychologically think that believing in God is a good thing is the job definition for perfection is already filled. You don't
Mm.
have to be perfect, right? God
Yeah.
can be perfect. I can be messed up.
Yeah.
And also, the other thing is to know, like, when you see, as we all do, very accomplished, very able people in the news who do unbelievably stupid things, mess up their lives. I mean, all of that, you realize like every human being is deeply flawed. And
Yes.
you're not the exception. Trust me, nobody is. So you're going to make mistakes and you're going to mess up. And that's just part of the journey. And you have to learn from it as opposed to beat yourself up for it, which is not productive.
Right. I mean, I've definitely been somebody who, holds on to the things that I regret for like way too long. And I think something that recently, like I'd say like within the last like year or two, that helped me kind of realize that like I need to be more forgiving to myself is realizing that like even these, people in the Bible that we put up on the pedestals,
Right.
they're not perfect.
Exactly. There is no perfect person in the Jewish
Right.
tradition. No, Moses makes mistakes, Abraham makes mistakes, Sarah makes mistakes. I mean,
Yeah.
and if they do, as you said, I certainly can. It's okay if I do.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a good thing to always keep in mind is that I was just actually this morning when I was teaching Torah class, I was I was saying that this student once wrote Rabbi Hutner, who was a huge figure in the traditional Jewish world, very learned, wonderful rabbi, on and on. And they wrote him and they said, I so admire you and you're so wonderful and I can never be like you. And Hutner wrote back this great letter where he said, I got to this place, but I wasn't always at this place.
Mm.
And it took a lot of work and a lot of struggle. And if you'd known me when I was your age, I would have looked a lot like you. It's a wonderful letter where he says like, it takes time and it takes effort to grow. And so don't
Yeah.
beat yourself up. That's not the point.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Because I
Yeah.
know I know that a lot of people listening to the show, like, wish that they, were
We're
able
more
to
like
react
this.
differently or,
Well, listen, I'll tell you also, this is really, Shakespeare, who, after all, was fairly accomplished. He has this sonnet where he talks about desiring this man's art and that man's scope with
Mm.
what I most enjoy contented least. And I thought, boy, if Shakespeare can be envious, you know,
Yes.
then all of us obviously fall short and wish we were like this or like that. I mean, it's human.
Right.
But you just have to let it not eat you up inside because you still have something unique to give to the world. Since after all, as the Kotzker Rebbe said very beautifully, if I spend my time trying to be someone else, who will be me?
Right.
Uh, and you're unique. So and you're unique with your flaws as well as with your virtues, and that's true of all of us. So there is a way to look at the entire package of the human being that will make you happier. And part of it is to understand that a lot of the world is really good, that people generally want to do good if given the opportunity, that sometimes when people are angry and you respond not angrily, they change almost immediately
Mm.
because they assume you're going to get angry back at them. And when you don't, it changes the conversation.
Right.
And there are, if you go forward with a more, you can't change everything or everyone. It's not true that you create your own reality, but you can create some of your own reality
Mm.
without question.
I have a question for you. What kind of advice would you give to somebody who feels like they are not able to feel joy? Like maybe they've got a diagnosis of depression or like severe anxiety or like something even bigger, and
So this is serious, and as you and I, I'm sure both know
yeah.
many people who struggle with this. And obviously, the first thing to do is to get a diagnosis and
Hmm.
to see if there are medical helps for this. I'll tell you something else that I think is really, and I've only come to appreciate this lately, in part because I'm allergic, but I see people relating to animals in ways that are incredibly helpful and healing.
Mm.
And sometimes people who are depressed or people who are anxious, a dog, a cat, a horse, whatever, can be
Yes.
incredibly helpful. And I wouldn't have said that if you'd asked me 5 years ago. I'm not sure I would have thought of that, but I've seen it multiple times in my life, in part because it's less anxiety provoking to relate to something. It's not going to talk back to you if you do something, or say
Right.
something that's not. And so that's, and then also, I hope that this is true. Religious communities can be very supportive and very
Mm.
loving and very accepting. Sometimes I know that there are some communities that aren't, but if you find a community for you, they can really be quite wonderful. And everybody needs someone, a friend, a partner, something to whom you can unburden yourself, and also to understand that you're not alone. There
Yes.
are others who are struggling with exactly the same issues. We understand so much more about the different ways that people work and the different dysfunctions that people can have, both physically and psychologically, than we used to. And it's a much more accepting world. So if you have panic attacks, all I can tell you is I know lots of people who share the exact same. You're not alone.
Yeah.
And that's really helpful to know that you are not alone.
I think that's so important what you're saying right now because I feel like so many people feel like they're the only person in the world that has those thoughts
Yeah.
or has those feelings and they feel like an alien,
Yes.
and they feel like nobody would understand them. I even know
Right.
people who like hold themselves back from living. They won't date
Right.
because they don't feel like they're worthy
Yes.
of it or they don't want to like put any of this on somebody else. And it's so important what you're sharing because it is true that there are so many other people out there that have the exact same thing. There are groups of people.
I'll make a blanket statement, and someone in your audience is welcome to test me on it. Whatever you're suffering with, I've heard it before.
Mhm.
I promise you. It's like no matter how unusual or difficult or strange or painful, I've heard it before. It's like human beings are very varied creatures and we are all deeply flawed.
Yes.
So just understand you're part of the human community. That's what it is, you know? And by the way, it's almost like very beginning of the Torah tells us this. God puts people in paradise, in the very best place you could be. It says, you can stay here as long as you want, as long as you don't do this one thing. Just this one thing. Don't eat from this. That's all. That's it. Not 5 minutes later. That's what they do.
Right.
So we're built, to be not perfect.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is.
It's true. Yeah. No, nobody's perfect. Everybody's got stuff. Everyone's dealing with something. And I love what you're saying about connecting to a community, whether it's like a support group or a religious
Yeah.
community or
Support groups, religious communities, whatever you can find where
yeah,
other people can unburden themselves to you and you
yes,
can to other people. And the reason I put it that way is because sometimes what's really important is to know that you can help others.
yeah,
Helping others is really healing. I tell sometimes people who are depressed, go serve at a soup kitchen
yes.
because to see how much joy and help you can bring to someone else can make you realize how much worth you actually really do have in this world because you do.
And you get to see also the power that you
Yep.
have by just being kind. Even something as simple as like smiling at somebody
Yes.
can change their whole day.
Yep. And you can see also what other people are struggling with, which is
Yes.
helpful too. You are not struggling alone.
Oh, that's so important. And I also love what you said about having a pet. Actually, my husband and I last night were talking about how much we love our dogs. And we were just talking about
Yep.
how much life they bring to our house and how much comfort and they're just like it's like this unconditional love like they're
Yeah.
always so happy to see you and they would cuddle with you all day and just like lick your
Right.
face and like they get you out of bed. I mean, like for somebody who feels like they have no reason to get out of bed in the morning, I mean,
Yes.
taking your dog out for a morning walk
Is a great thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there are
Like
so
I
many.
take early morning walks and almost everyone else I see is walking a dog,
Yes.
you know? Yeah, it's
And
true.
I mean, they need us as much as we need them. I mean, the shelters are packed. So if anyone's
That's also
considering
true.
that,
You can save a dog's life. Yeah.
you could save their lives. Yeah. And this is so special and I'm really happy that you're sharing all this because I know people that feel like, they they're the exception. Everyone else
Right.
can feel joy except
Of
for
course.
them. And they feel like they've tried everything. They've tried like the therapies and the pills and that nothing has worked. And, you know, I think that it's important to realize also that like there are things you can do in addition.
And I'll say one other thing that I think is that comes with age, which is as you get older, you realize that nothing stays the same. Things really do change.
Mhm.
Like the older you get, the more you have outlived certain sorrows, and you think when this happens, you think, I'll never, ever, ever get past this. And then you realize, oh my God, some things I don't even remember, things that I thought would be forever, especially in high school.
Right.
And now I don't even remember them. And that's also important, is don't assume that the way you feel if it's bad will be forever,
Yes.
because things really do change.
It's You're reminding me when I was leaving high school and going to college and all my friends were going to different schools, I remembered thinking this was going to be the hardest thing of my life.
Yeah,
I haven't thought about that until right now.
right. Yeah, it's really true. And that's one of the reasons that you feel things so much more acutely when you're young is
Yeah.
because you don't yet know that things will change, but they
Yes.
really do. And so try to help them along in that process if you need to.
I love it. I have another question for you. Rabbi Nachman said that if you're not feeling happy and if you're just like in this state of depression, to push yourself to sing and dance,
Yeah.
and that the good feelings will follow. What do you think about that?
So I have often said to people, like, when someone's depressed and you say to them, come with me to this party, and they go, no, it's partly because the piece of them is sunk in and enjoying the depression. And they know that if they go to the party, they actually will feel different.
Yeah.
And this is a very Jewish thing. It used to be called the James Lang theory of emotions, but Judaism got there first. How you feel, we think, comes before what you do. But Judaism teaches that often what you do creates the feeling. So we tell people to light Shabbos candles even if you don't feel like it, because once you light them, actually, you will feel something that you don't feel if you don't light them. And the same thing is true here. Singing, dancing, like joy sometimes follows the feeling. And that's one of the reasons why you join a support. I don't want to join the group. I know, but once you join the group, you'll actually feel differently.
Yes.
And so I do think that joyous practices like singing and dancing, like connecting to other people, joyous practices create joy. It's not just that joy creates joyous practices. It goes the other way too. There's a phrase in Hebrew, mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma, which means even though you start off doing it for not the right reason, after you do it, it ends up to be for the right reason. And that's an important principle to sort of keep in mind. Just try it, and you'll see that the trying can create things that you could never get to without the action itself.
It's so important. And I've even noticed in myself that like sometimes I'll push myself to do something that I don't feel like doing. Like sometimes it's go swimming, it's like I'm tired, I don't feel like it, it's
I
too
have this
early.
standing joke. My daughter lived with me until very recently, and all through COVID. And I used to say, and she would always kid me about it. I would say, like, I don't want to put on a tuxedo and go to the hotel and do the wedding. I just want to sit on the couch. She said, and then Dad, every time you came home, and I said, how was the wedding? You go, it was great. It was wonderful. And it's true. It's like, I know enough by now to know I don't feel like it, but it will be great.
Yeah, sometimes we have to just push ourselves out the door
Exactly.
put the tennis shoes on, go put the tux on, just get out.
And by the way, another thing we didn't mention, but it's true, is exercise does that too for a lot of people. I'm sure there are people who want to go exercise, but a lot of us don't want to go exercise. But if we actually do it afterwards, we're glad we did.
Yes. Yeah, because it boosts the endorphins, like I used to work in a psychiatric hospital, and they have that as part of the daily plan for people. They push them to exercise because they know that it's going to make them happier.
Yeah.
It's also
there you go, a complete program for you to get happier.
Yes.
All of that in some 20 minutes.
Thank you. This was amazing. Is there anything else you want to leave people with that you think people should know about happiness? Or
No, only this, that again and again and again, and Hanukkah is around our corner. Again and again and again, the Jewish people have found light in dark times, and that's because no matter how difficult, the same Rabbi Nachman you mentioned earlier, he said the great sin is despair. You can't be without hope. Believe me, whatever you're going through, human beings in the course of history have gone through that and far worse, and yet have managed to emerge. So always have hope. Always believe that there is a possibility that tomorrow will be brighter or could be made brighter. Just don't be without hope. There's a whole world and a lot of people who are there to be able to help you.
yes. Thank you.
Sure.
It's so important, all of this. And can people get in touch with you if they want to reach you? Is there a
Absolutely.
website or
I have a Facebook page, I have a
yes.
Twitter account, and you can,
All
and
the
both,
links will be in
and the
the
Facebook page has my email, which is
awesome.
probably the best way to get in touch.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so
Absolutely.
much. And everybody
Thank you.
check out his books.
Yes. I have
Amazing.
books too.
Everything will be
Okay.
in the show notes.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi. I really appreciate all this.
Bye.
Bye.